Oh, nice busting a move there, Dr. Joey.
Sure music.
Amazing. I love it. Well, happy CultureCast, everybody. Happy CultureCast Tuesday. Welcome, Dr. Joey.
I am
Super fired
delighted to
up.
be with you. It's a terrific Tuesday when I get to hang out with you.
Oh my goodness. And I love too, dude, that you were just bouncing to the fine tune by my friend Julius Wilder, who
Oh,
composed
wow.
it. Right. And I think I
Yep.
said, dude, we need something for the show. And he's like, let's capture the vibe. And absolutely, it's the vibe, especially for you today. I think you like that little tease that I did around what do car batteries have to do with culture?
I'm all
Um,
charged up.
I know, right? And I love this. I love how I think Nicole's already jumped on. Hey, Nicole. And she's like, I'm feeling positive about getting this convo getting started. Pretty
Absolutely.
amazing. Um, so, welcome, Dr. Joey. I think everyone has done some research on you. Before we all jumped on live, we were talking about
Uh-oh.
how we've connected with peeps, our connections on LinkedIn,
Yep.
and how people are super fired up about all the books that you've written. You've written two books. The newest one, Work Positive in a Negative World. And then you have a similar title, which is Faith Positive in a Negative World. And
Yeah.
so uh, I
And I've
take
got a new one coming out too, Marisa.
you do.
In fact, let's see, 3 weeks. How
No
about that?
way.
It's almost hot now. Yeah.
Oh my
Small
gosh.
hinges swing big doors. It's the shortest book I've written. It's less than 100 pages. That's for all the people who say, I can't read books. Yeah, you can read this one in an hour.
I
It's written in
love.
small segments too, little chunks. So you can just put it on the water tank on your toilet and pick it up and read
Oh
it.
my goodness.
Yeah.
Right. A few minutes of time. Got it.
Bathroom books. Hmm.
Well, I love it. Let's get into those themes as well. But like,
Sure.
let's talk about your journey, Dr. Joey, before we get into culture.
Mm.
Um, I know our peeps out there would love to hear your journey to how you ended up being a coach, an author, a radio host. Like, what was your path, Dr. Joe, and what got you on this pathway?
Yeah, well, that was a question that I was like, okay, how do I tell it quickly? Because I've been around a little
Just
while,
tell it.
obviously, right? Bald and silver hair. Um, so taking it back, I remember a time of significant adversity and my high performance pattern, which is one of the things we do in our coaching company, is helping people discover their high performance patterns. So my high performance pattern really is this: experience adversity, find the opportunity in the adversity, and capitalize on it. So that's kind of my 3 step. I know it's supposed to be a 2 step, but
Sure.
those are my 3 steps. So that early adversity was at 9 years old. I come from an entrepreneurial family and I wanted to do my thing, right? Even as a 9-year-old. So I went out to do what most 9-year-olds do, and that is borrow dad's lawnmower and go mow a yard and get somebody to pay you for it, right? Didn't work out so well. Got a viral infection in my lungs due to what I discovered was a high amount of allergy to mown grass.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, I wound up in Duke University Hospital for about a week. My mom was there with me every single moment. She's still with me every single moment. Um, but during that, they basically said to her, "We're not sure he's going to make it through the night." And I can't imagine hearing that as a parent. I'm sure some of the folks with us today have heard that,
Hmm.
and that's just something that I've been very blessed to never have to hear. But I remember my mom reaching under the mist tent, and because they were putting this medicine in there that turns out I'm allergic to the medicine too. But I
Oh my
remember her.
goodness.
Yeah, it's just like a bundle of allergies. So, but I remember mom reaching up under the mist tent and taking my little hand because I'm 9 years old, third grade, right? I'm supposed to be learning cursive and multiplication tables, and I'm in the hospital. And she grabs my hand and she looks me in the eye and she says, "Joey, I am positive you're going to make it through the night." And in that moment, it was just like one of those moments that just cements in your
Yeah.
consciousness forever. I mean, grows roots quickly, gains height quickly. And I believed her. And so I said, okay. And I did, and it was an amazing thing. So I didn't go back and try to mow lawns. For-
Right.
Fortunately, I had the foresight to do that. But instead, in the mailbox came something from the Sales Leadership Club, which was selling inscribed Christmas cards. And so I said, well, this is something I can do. So in August, I grew up in Eastern North Carolina. I sold inscribed Christmas cards, which were a novelty then. Marisa, now
Yeah.
it's a novelty to get someone's handwriting well, it's a novelty to get a paper card in the mail anyway, but not to have someone's signature in it, right, is a big deal. But then inscribed Christmas cards were a big deal. So here it is, 100 degrees, 100% humidity, and I'm going door to door hawking Frosty the Snowman cards, and sold a bunch of them. Got a 3-speed bike, which was the latest greatest at that time. Got a cassette recorder, which was the latest greatest at that time. And then I got a telescope, which meant I could peer
Wow.
heavens. And man, that was just way cool. So that really began this entrepreneurial launch for me. I mentioned being from an entrepreneurial family. My grandfather was a dairy farmer, also a tobacco farmer. And then since he and my grandmother didn't have anything else to do, they ran a country store. But I watched as he worked with his farm hands, the way that he treated them. And Marisa, they were of a different ethnic group. Always, always, always the most respect.
Hmm.
The most respect. I mean, this was before diversity and inclusion were even buzzwords, right?
Yeah.
But my grandfather was practicing that. He respected them. He cared for them as people. So for me, I learned early on about culture that respect and empathy are
Hmm.
what you must have in a culture in order to help people become their best selves and achieve more than they realize they can achieve. Also, watch the way he interacted with his customers that came in the store. He knew them by name. He knew their backgrounds. He knew their family stories. He knew what was going on in their lives, like an illness or someone who passed away or something like that. And he extended way beyond transaction to transformation. And
Wow.
respect, Marisa, plus that empathy, that builds a transformational culture. So I just kind of, just really blessed to grow up in that context and to discover that. So later, when I was about 17, this was in the mid 70s, there was a lot of economic distress in the country then. You think it's bad now. We were in gas lines for hours just to buy 2 gallons of gas, right?
Oh, and then you either had even or odd days, right?
Yeah,
When you can
you're
buy
really,
gas.
you've read about
I think, yeah, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so I remember all that, and then so Dad's company, the company he worked for, he was a data processing manager, which we had before we had IT directors, right?
Yeah.
And that company went bankrupt. I mean, like we didn't have 7-Eleven; they just shut the doors. So I found myself as a 17-year-old, like, okay, you think you're going to college, but what are you going to do about it? Because now there's not a viable income coming in the house. So uh, I don't know, I meditated over it a lot and just felt compelled to go see Mr. Harper, who started an FM radio station, which was a novelty back then, right? FM radio was just coming on
Yeah.
in the mid 70s. So he started this 100,000 watt station in the midst of a recession. And so I said, well, people enjoy the way I talk. So I can talk, I can sit down. It's in air conditioning.
Yeah.
So, I went down there 2 hours later after going down. I had a job. 6 months later, I had the #1 afternoon drive show in that market.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so just he taught me culture too. And again, Marisa, it was respect and empathy lead to transformation. So I discovered very quickly. Now I could walk you through some radio broadcasting careers and things like that, where I learned the negative side of that, what I call Kevin culture,
Ooh,
just because,
Kevin.
yeah, well, I was working with a client and she kept talking about her boss. Sherm
Oh,
says
yeah, yeah, yeah.
57% of all of us leave a job because of a bad boss. Well, hers was horrible. I guess everybody's boss is the worst boss ever, right? When you
Right.
get on that train. So anyway, she's going on and on and on. And finally I just said, well, instead of calling him the boss, what could I call him? And she said, Kevin.
It was his name, Kevin?
Yeah,
Or was
that's
this
really his
just like
name.
a
And so like there was
okay.
venom dripping from her tongue as she said, Kevin. So I just began naming it Kevin culture as opposed to Karen, right?
Yeah.
But Kevin culture. So it's just that negative culture that demotivates people, that is simply transactional. I put in a paycheck, I expect to get task performed,
Right.
which is the opposite of transformational. So I just became convinced that that's what I wanted to avoid was the Kevin culture, even though for a brief time in my career, I became a Kevin because you do what you know, right?
Right.
And then I had the foresight and insight to take action on what I remembered from my grandfather and my father and Mr. Harper and others. So I just decided, hey, man, we need to help other people achieve this kind of awareness around respect and empathy, and then align that awareness with their actions, which is a basic coaching process. And so then I was off to the races. Then I discovered, hey, we need a context in which to
Yeah.
support respect and empathy in this transformation. And so that's when I became a culture architect.
Love it. And I love that you're calling it a culture architect. I mean, first of all, we've gone through the first couple of decades, 2.5 decades in your life. And I have goosebumps still with your mom reaching for your little hand underneath
Mm,
that tent when you're at the
yeah.
hospital. And she says to you, I am positive that you're going to make it through the night.
Mm,
I mean, to me, talk about being 9 and that being a really formative time, especially when you were so sick because you were allergic, et cetera. And then that just puts you on this different path of, doing
yes.
your hustle as a kid.
Yep.
But like, I still have goosebumps with that. And I think
Mm,
about, I think this is why I feel so simpatico every time you and I have this conversation, just
mm,
about observing life and then the
mm,
observations and the experiences you've had
mm,
with your grandfather,
mm.
right? And the way that he cared for people and people of different cultures.
Yes.
And early on, you had a role model. And I hear you too. I mean, we shouldn't have to put a label of inclusion and belonging and diversity. I mean, human nature that he taught you was you
Yeah.
just treat people with respect and
Yeah.
understand the shoes they're walking in and the life that
Yeah.
they're leading. And I love that because you've said this many times now, respect plus empathy equals transformation. And it's a
Absolutely.
transformational culture versus transactional.
Yeah.
So
Mm,
that's fascinating to me. Like
mm,
I see that. I see that, and I think that's the opposite way. I think about, I've told stories to you, and I know some on who are listening in now have heard the stories about me going to the grocery store with my dad. And
mm.
I was 9, and we
Yeah.
would go to the grocery store, and
Right.
back then, you'd write out a check to pay for the groceries, and my dad would, be at the check stand, and we would be paying for the groceries. And this is when we moved outside of Los Angeles, and actually, we were visiting my aunt. She lived outside in a suburb, which we ended up moving to. And so the checker
Uh,
looks at my dad, and he starts speaking very slowly and yelling at him
oh,
and essentially just says, that will be $20, whatever, right? Like
yeah.
whatever it was. So he could
Yeah.
write out the check. And I'm watching all of this at 9 years old. And I
Mm.
remember saying to the checker, hey, you don't need to yell at my dad. He understands English. Like I
Yeah,
don't get
really.
this, right?
Hey,
So
he's not
I,
deaf either.
right, I know. I've got mad respect for what you've learned from your grandfather and how he
Yeah.
treated people, and interacted with them in their store.
Mm,
And then, you know, you just kind of busting out this radio show. And at the end of the day, it's like it is about culture and how people treat each other
mhm.
to feel better. So,
Absolutely.
and then this Kevin culture. I don't know if you can live that down. I mean, Kevin culture. I don't know if there's any Kevins on right now, but oh man. And I know what you
We're not
mean.
talking about you, dude,
Yeah,
okay?
not the Kevin that's on right now.
So it's not you
So
specifically. Something else,
I
if I could just allude to
yeah.
something else quickly, Marisa. Something else my grandfather taught me was what my friend Dr. Bob Johansen refers to as bioempathy,
Mm,
and that is that respect um, extended beyond human beings. And let me just say that we saw everyone. Now this was nouveau for Eastern North Carolina, where I grew up. Okay, I'm just going to say that that was
yeah.
not the cultural norm. but the respect was for all human beings, but it extended beyond human beings. It extended into nature. So that being a farmer, he understood the cycles of nature and how to treat the soil so that the soil would treat us well and grow the crops that he was intending.
Yeah.
Tobacco wasn't the best crop to grow, right? But it was a cash crop at the time. But he grew corn and soybeans and things like this. And so I began to understand this rhythm and cycle that we have with the world around us. You know, baseline is all human beings.
Hmm.
But then how do you care for the dairy cows? This is going to sound too woo woo for some people, but how do you care for those dairy cows in such a way that they're living their best life? I mean,
Yeah.
not only, sure, you want them to produce great milk, but you care for those cows in such a way that they care for you. So there's this synergistic relationship
Yeah.
with all of nature, as opposed to this domination in which you seek to suck everything out you can. Now, granddaddy would be what, he's 14, so he'd be 109 or so today. Um, Way ahead of his time. And I was just
Right.
that sanctity of all of life and just understanding what we call today sustainability through relationships, just really formed and shaped me. So for almost 25 years now, my wife and I have lived on this little 22-acre plot of earth here in
Amazing.
Virginia. Both our girls grew up here, and one daughter is in her mid 30s and living away from home now. She enjoys spending time volunteering at a rescue ranch for horses because she had her own horse here and learned how to care for the horse and things like that. So anyway, I love that notion of bioempathy, and that's just a part of me. My feet have to get in the dirt and get out of the concrete and asphalt, steel and glass world as much as possible. So
Yeah.
that
I,
was
I
part,
think
and
you
that's
are
culture
way,
too.
your grandpa was way ahead of his time. And I think you
Yeah,
were too, not
yeah.
only as it relates to just what it means to be inclusive. And you talk about respect and empathy. I
Hmm.
love that you shared bioempathy.
Mm,
You said this word already, but sustainability, especially in the last couple of years, ESG is a big deal,
right.
especially for large companies,
Hmm.
um, especially if they're public, because a lot of the shareholders are demanding that there's
Hmm.
some commitment that not only are they making good money, as a public company, but they're also taking care of the environment and in the world, right? And
Hmm.
what I thought about was I had the chance to go to Davos this year, so back in January, and
Hmm.
I had the chance to go speak about, and I called it people sustainability, and
Mm,
and it is
right.
not only about how you treat people, but it is about the environment that you're creating for people. And
Yeah.
when I think about sustainability, it's one step further. It's regenerative. So if you
Yeah.
think about regenerative farming, and you
Hmm.
take like yeah, I used to work at a coffee company. I'll just say
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And we learned
I've heard
I
something
became a
about it. Yeah.
coffee master. Yeah, and you learned
Might
a
even
lot
had a
about,
cup or two this morning
yeah,
myself
oh, great,
from that
great.
brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think about like the soil and how
Hmm.
you grow the beans, et cetera.
Hmm.
And you take this whole notion of regeneration, and then how does that apply to, I'll just broadly say growing people in an organization.
Yes.
And not
Yes.
only this generation that exists in an organization, I've also had the fortunate opportunity to work in large hourly populations where
Hmm.
generations of families actually come and work for these brands. And
Hmm.
so I feel like, gosh, your grandfather and your observations were so ahead of their time, because only now,
Mm.
especially after the last 3 years that we've all had as a world, and I
Yeah.
think especially as it relates to creating culture with, I'd say, work environments, right? And the environment could
Hmm.
be anything, the
Sure.
office, could be at home, et cetera.
Right.
And this whole notion of sustainability and
Hmm.
keeping intact for people this overall, not only mental but emotional well-being, like
Oh,
because of
yeah.
everything that we've
Hmm.
experienced, as
More so.
people, and
Yeah.
and the shared experience of a pandemic a couple years ago,
Hmm.
right? So
Mm. Yeah.
way ahead of your time, dude.
Well, again, nothing I particularly did. It was just the good fortune of being born his grandson.
Oh, wow.
And I have a unique opportunity now because up 2 stories in I'm in my home office, home studio. Up 2 stories is a 3.5-year-old granddaughter of mine who's
Oh,
sleeping, taking her little nap, and so I had the pleasure before we got on of sitting down and reading a book with her. Right. So, hey, Marisa, here it is. I'm extending to that next generation
yeah.
and that same respect and empathy. And I'm a lot better pops than I was a dad. I can assure you that. And I was a great dad. Don't get me wrong, but I'm an even better pops because I'm using that coach approach. How do
Yeah.
we help her as she inquires of the world? How do I help her continue to raise her awareness? And for me, the fulcrum that on which all this pivots is this amazing opportunity we have daily to transform ourselves from me to we. And when I
Love
can
it.
go from me to we, then there's no competition, there's only abundance, and I'm as committed to your success as I am my own, probably more so because I really do believe that when I succeed because I helped you succeed, right?
That's
And that
right.
multiplies the joy factor in what we do. So just being able to pass on that transformation from me to we to her, that's way beyond. I want to make sure that we have a good economy while I'm still alive,
Yeah.
or any of those egotistical, self-serving kinds of notions. No, I totally eschew those and look way beyond that into
Yeah.
children's children, and how we can create a respect plus empathy equals transformation from me to we world.
I love this me to we, and I love that you have a fulcrum to base it on. And
Hmm.
so it sounds pretty basic of a question then, which
Uh-huh.
is how would you define culture?
Hmm. Well, I'm obviously from the South, so we have lots of colloquialisms,
Yeah.
some
Okay.
of which, some of which I can mention on this show, and some of which I shan't. But um, it's how we roll around here.
Oh, love it.
That's culture. It's how we roll around here. You don't have to experience it long. It's like taking someone's temperature and
Yeah.
you don't even have to put it in your mouth anymore. They just place it on your forehead. 2 seconds later, you got the temperature. I mean, how do you roll around here? What's it like to work here? I mean, those kinds of things. And typically, I can, and I'm not saying I judge. I'm just saying I'm inspecting fruit, right? But typically,
Yeah.
just listening to the way people talk about their work and talk about their work culture tells you, and because you've
Oh,
been
yeah.
in it a bazillion times, it tells you how you roll around here. So rather than some stilted question that they may not be able to relate to, and look,
Right.
I'm a doctor, I have a doctorate degree, I can use all the academic language you want, but how do we roll around here? Kind of gives people a handle to grab hold of and say, here it is.
Yeah. Here it is. And I'd love to add on to your culture definition. It's and actually focus on the word we, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not me, it's we.
Right.
And I think what I'm learning in interacting with leaders now, not working specifically inside a company and just advising many other companies, and especially not the leaders, I'll say in the individual
Yes.
contributors, the employees, don't feel like they have a say in how we roll.
Mm.
Right? And so they observe and they kind of jump in, and figure out how to get in there and roll with the rest. But I would love to add on, like it is that focus on we, and then in focusing on we are the leaders inviting,
Yes.
everybody to actually add into how we roll, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And it's so short-sighted when you don't do that,
Yeah.
because you're just relegating it to what you can do. So I'm retreating back into me, or I'm retreating back into me and the people like me. And look, I understand leadership is visionary. We can't all be haggers, right? We need
Yeah.
some haggers out there who are pushing us, pulling us, cajoling us to move forward, to look beyond the horizons that everyone else sees. However, there's so much more. And I mean, you know this because you've seen it over and over. You've in fact led this way, at least based on the responses that I've gotten to LinkedIn when people found out I was going to be on this today and how much they love you. There's so much more we can do together when I move out of that insecure, egotistical space of me,
Yeah.
embrace the we and really make that transformation. It's I think it's a path to profitability. It sounds squishy. It sounds woo woo. But as my friend Larry Levine, author of from the book Selling from the Heart, says, soft skills drive hard dollars.
That's right. I totally agree with you. And actually, it's not woo woo. I think at the end of the day, if you don't take care of your people, they can't take care of what you're asking them to do in terms of like what the company's objectives are. I mean,
Mhm.
I think about having a career in human resources, and I always get asked the question, how did you end up in human resources, and why did you choose that path? And like many, it wasn't a choice initially, but
Uh-huh.
then I think at the end of the day, it was probably a calling. If you
Mhm.
relate it all the way back to what was happening in my life when I was 9,
Sure.
and growing up.
Right.
But I think about what I learned in a Fortune 25 company
Hmm.
early on in my career. Although it was fascinating, there was a lot of opportunity to be more inclusive, and everything that we talked about at the beginning in terms of respect and empathy, that did not
Sure.
exist.
Mm.
However, what did exist was I learned that at the end of the day, to be a people leader or human resources leader, to enable people leaders or partner people leaders, you
Mm.
have to understand, A, what is the strategy of the company? How do you define it? How do you break that down into, like, say, an annual plan and all the way down to the individual? But
Mhm.
then I've always been curious too about making sure you have the right leadership capability, right? And that leaders and companies are organized in the right way, and that employees are motivated to go out to understand and accomplish these objectives and goals. Like,
Yeah.
high level, that's the secret, I think,
Yep.
to HR. And then, like, responding to your note on culture and you talking about Larry Levine and leading from the heart,
Mhm.
I also say that culture is a reflection of leadership,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Right.
And it,
And it's a thermostat. Leadership sets the temperature for culture and whatever that might be where you are.
that's right. So I want to jump into the car battery, and
Okay.
and I crack up because it's such a cool title, and it's just so relevant. I know you've got a new book coming out in a few weeks,
Yep.
but then working positive in a negative world,
Uh-huh.
and there's a lot of just I'll just say negativity, in the mass media,
Mm.
and then in the world, and then you think about the emotions that now everyone has experienced in their own way coming back to the workplace. And again, I'm sure you've been in these conversations too with other companies, like, do you bring people back to the office, and do they come in for a day or 2 or 4
Yeah.
days, whatever?
I
And
know.
there's this agita, right, around, like, how do we work differently? And I love that you say work positively. So say
Mhm.
more about why the title Work Positive in a Negative World. I mean, what have you seen? And,
Wow. Thanks.
from a negative standpoint, and then let's talk about how you can charge it up with
Okay.
positivity. Yeah.
Sure. And living on a farm, we have car batteries, we have tractor batteries, we have
Right?
four-wheeler batteries, we have lawnmower batteries. We, I'm working on transitioning as many of these over as I can to solar-fed batteries, by the way. So,
Oh my goodness.
yeah. So I love the imagery when I saw that on LinkedIn of a car battery. Um, First of all, and I've had the privilege of speaking virtually or in person all over the world. I've yet to have anyone question me about it's a negative world.
Mhm.
So I think we're in pretty much lockstep agreement as human beings that negativity exists. However, so many people, when they hear the word positive, they think, okay, I've just got to deny the negativity. I've
Mm,
got to
mhm.
somehow say that it's not a negative world. And that's the exact opposite of what my high performance pattern is and what I think exists in the world. The world's broken. It just doesn't function at optimal level. We have the amazing opportunity to create that transformation we were talking about from me to we, which brings the regeneration, right?
Mhm.
And begins that regeneration process. However, saying or pretending that there's no negativity in the world is that's a zero sum game. There is no
Totally.
ROI on that because you're
Right.
going to constantly be forced to confront. You're going to bump your head up against that negativity on a daily, oh, I'll say sometimes hourly, because some days you just wake up and boom, there it is. The battlefield in your mind is at a DEFCON 1, and you just got up, right? So filtering the negative world is the key. As I like to say, it all starts and stops in your head, Marisa.
Yeah.
And so focusing on the positive and filtering out the negative is the key. Now, I discovered for myself, now, I mean, they were already out there, but I discovered for myself that what I refer to as the 5 core practices, bundles of habits, right? 5 core
Mhm.
practices of a work positive culture during the Great Recession. And this,
Mm.
I'm going to tag
Yeah.
back into my grandfather here. Again, remember, adversity, there's the opportunity for transformation. So my wife looked at me one day and said, "Honey, aren't you supposed to be traveling?"
Yeah.
And with the Great Recession on, she really does still love me. 41 years in a week, we
Oh,
will get
wow.
married.
Happy
So,
anniversary.
but she, was concerned because my cadence, my work had changed. And so I said, "Yeah, I am supposed to be traveling, but I'm not, and it's due to this recession." Well,
Yeah.
I mean, geez, there's always something going on economically if you're looking for that kind of thing, right? But I remembered my grandfather, born in 1914, as a young lad, experienced the Great Depression, back when depression was an
Yeah.
economic instead of a medical term, right?
Right.
And that was when you didn't know where your next meal was coming from. I mean, that was, you talk to people around the globe, and that was horrific. That generation is dying away, but that nonetheless, that long tail still exists. So I'm like, okay, we're in the midst of the Great Recession. Surely somebody created a company during the Great Depression that's
Sure.
thriving today. And I want to know how they did it. So since I wasn't traveling, I had all this time on my hands. I could research, and so the internet was not quite as high speed as it is today, so it took a little longer, Marisa. But I researched all of these amazing, I call them Great Depression gurus,
Sure.
these amazing people who overcame adversity, who weren't paralyzed by the fear of what was going on at the time, but who were very heroic, very courageous. How did they do that? What was their mindset? What were their relationships? What was their emotional engagement with their work? What did they actually do? And then what were the ethics around the results that they
Hmm.
achieved? Because I
Yeah.
knew that there had to be some sort of ethical consideration given to what they were doing. And so I found all of these amazing people, and boy, I'm happy to talk about them because they really were amazing people. And these companies continue to thrive today. So I just began
Amazing.
dissecting their habits, their patterns. What was it they did? And so I began plowing some of that into my own work, and working on my mindset, doing that internal work, working on my relationships, working on myself in regard to those relationships, my
Yep.
emotional engagement, the actions I was taking, the ethical outcomes that I was pursuing for all of us, we instead of me. And as I did, I began to notice lift even in the midst of a great recession to my work. And I also noticed that other people were interested in it. So podcasting wasn't as
Yeah.
ubiquitous then as it is now. But I began doing terrestrial radio shows, TV shows, things like that, writing articles, so much so that Entrepreneur Magazine said, "Hey, we want to do a book." So it didn't come out until 2011 because you're in the midst of these
Yeah.
birthing pangs now.
Right.
It takes forever
Right.
to write a book
Totally.
and get it out there. But in 2011, the first Work Positive in a Negative World book came out. And what I discovered in the intervening years, particularly around the start of the pandemic, was, as you were talking about earlier, the leaders, the C suite, sometimes are disconnected from what's
Yeah.
going on.
Full on. Hmm.
And it's almost like they create an echo chamber for themselves, but they're complicit in that conspiracy to stay in the echo chamber. And so I said, man, we really need to talk about this from a team perspective. So Work Positive in a Negative World Team Edition came out in 2020. And that one really accelerates from the mid-level manager to those front-facing teams, as I like to
Yeah.
call them, the ones who are doing that heavy lifting. And that's when I transform. I don't like to say from top to bottom, but you know what I mean, all
Yeah.
across the company. And in teams and C-suite, we really can transform around those 5 core practices.
Amazing. Um, I love how you talk about, first of all, acknowledging that there is negativity and that everyone that you've interviewed and that you've met
Yeah.
have said there's no debating that there's negativity in the world. But I think it's all about, you talk about these 5 core practices, and
Mhm.
it starts with, what I'm hearing you talk about is the internal work, right? So getting your mindset right, getting your
Mhm.
relationships right, your emotional engagement with
Right.
others, right? And then and you talk about ethics too, and what you're accomplishing together, are there
Sure.
ethics behind it? I love that it's all in how you choose to respond,
Yes.
and I think that's kind of what you're sharing. Like there's
Mhm.
this negativity that's happening in the world. And I think at the end of the day, the work starts with you as a human being and as a leader. And
100%.
so I'm just reflecting back with what you're saying. But
Mhm.
I also would love your opinion. And I know that you and I had some pre-show chat, um, especially coming out of the pandemic,
Mm.
and and with this new generation that's also in the workforce, there's a new level of, I'll just use the word worry, right?
Yeah.
Like worry and emotion
Mm.
that I think contributes from acknowledging what's happening in the world and then trying to make sense of what they've lived through, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that? And like as
Mm.
a leader, whether you're coming from the middle or from the top, how
Mhm.
do you acknowledge and work with that? Because I think that's the new level of acknowledgement that I think leaders need to have around the emotion that people actually all already bring with them, into the workplace.
Yes. Mm. Yeah. And I'm so glad to speak to that because
Yeah,
when I was young and early in my career, there was this artificial division of the self, which I never was quite comfortable with because I knew it was a lie. But it's like, who's going to be bold enough to say the emperor was not wearing any clothes, right?
sure,
But
right.
there was this personal, professional, and it's like what I do in my private life is not going to affect what I do in my work life. What I do in my work life is not going to affect my private life.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew here in my gut that just had to be a lie because I knew one Joey was showing up in both places. And so to create that consistency as opposed to schizophrenia was so important. Coming out of the pandemic, I think we've seen accelerant ignite this recognition that we
Mm-hmm.
are people and that what if my work positive day must begin at home, right?
Yeah,
Whether I'm walking from the bedroom or bathroom to my home office downstairs, or whether I'm getting on a train, or whether I'm stuck in a commute, um, I'm one person. And so just celebrating that and coming out of the pandemic, we're having better conversations. Now, the adversity that we went through may go through again, right?
yeah,
With the pandemic, at what cost does that come? I'm not saying that I would do it all over again for anything in the world. But again, Marisa, every adversity, as Dr. Peel said, every adversity contains within it the seeds of opportunity. So what's the opportunity? Well, the adversity part was really exacerbated, and we're talking about mental health
yeah,
at the end of the day.
absolutely. Yep.
30% increase in prescriptions for anti-anxiety and antidepressants. 30% increase. And we were already, well on our way to being a medicated world. But a 30% increase in that. So, I can stand here and wring my hands, this is terrible. Some of the people in my generation or the persons close to my age like to moan about the young
Sure.
people and the young generation. Um, I never heard my grandfather do that. I saw him investing in young people constantly. So, to your point, we have an amazing opportunity to have mental health conversations like we've never had before, and to simply acknowledge it. And once we say it out loud, then we can deal with it. So giving people the freedom to talk about these things, their fears, their anxieties, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Here's the baseline, though, that leaders today have got to put into play with true digital natives and
Okay.
some millennials and some Zs and these true digital natives that are entering the workforce now. Mentor with hope. Mentor with hope. Hope is the missing ingredient.
Yeah.
And the pandemic certainly finished sucking it out of us, right? But
Right.
even prior to that, they saw my generation, with the highest divorce rate, the highest rate of bankruptcies, the
Yeah.
highest rate of addictions. We just didn't do such a good job. So the next generation's slower to marry, slower to have children, in
Sure.
terms of chronology, rightfully so. And that has trickled right on down to where there's been a loss of hope. And we can
Mm,
deconstruct and we can lob explosives over artificial walls at each other if we'd like, but that does nothing to restore the human spirit and to tap into the amazing creativity and innovation that all of us have within us, whether it's our mind, our relationships, our emotions, our actions, or our ethical need to be a good steward of who we are and what we're doing with the
sure.
world, in the world, right? So mentoring with hope. Hope is that baseline that we've lived through stuff before. Okay, I'm going back to the Great Depression, right? When
Sure.
we didn't know where meals were coming from, but we figured it out. So how do you capture a mindset that is rooted in hope that I can transform from me to we? And when I begin that transformation, it really does create hope in all of our lives and in our work. And therefore, I like to think of it as the great redefinition of work.
Love
I know
it.
we've had the great resignation, we've had the great regret. Now, we think we can quietly quit. Oh, what? Now we have to loudly quit, right?
Yeah.
No. All of this adversity is providing an amazing opportunity for the great redefinition of work, in which we cover each other, why we're here, because we're unique. Almost 8 billion of
That's
us
right.
now. We're
That's
unique.
right.
And what is it that we can do to align our purpose with the company purpose? See a path for belonging and becoming right there,
Yep.
so that we can move forward in hope that we're going to create a better tomorrow.
Oh my goodness. I mean, you've said so much there too. I love what you just said though around what can we do to align our purpose, our personal purpose to what the company's purpose is, and then
Mhm.
create a place of belonging and becoming. And I think there's something to be said around, especially the last couple of years, where people have taken stock and inventory on, all right, well, what is my purpose? What is my life's calling? Right. And I think that's more forward today in terms of
Yes.
hearing
Thank goodness.
generations bring that into the workplace. I
Mhm.
also love that you're right. I think it is mental health that we're talking about, a mental health conversation. And actually, it's okay to have those conversations.
Mhm.
And God, a couple of things that you said, I love this. And I know Stephen Jackson had reacted to it like hope is the missing ingredient. I love
Yeah.
for leaders, for the baseline for leaders, especially with two true digital natives,
Mhm.
mentor with hope.
Mhm.
And I love that. And I also think about this generation, especially coming in, where their first interaction, their first true job was, work career
Mhm.
has been a Zoom environment, right?
Yeah.
And so you said this already in kind of reacting to my question, and I
Uh-huh.
say it in a similar way. Like, I think the good news is, too, the world realized, wait a minute, we've got human beings who work at the center of
Yeah.
these companies and what we do. And I
Mhm.
think it's humanity, which is the lesson learned for leaders, that it's okay to express that and actually bring that into the culture,
Bring it.
into the workplace,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and then I
100%.
think the last thing that I've got a reaction to as well, I visited a friend last week in New York, and she's an artist, and
Mm.
we were just talking about all of her art. I happened to be sitting, I don't know if Vivian, if you're watching, but I'm sitting with Vivian and she was actually painting me. It was pretty
Hi,
amazing.
Vivian.
Yeah. And she was just saying, continue having these conversations. And she was fired up about seeing you coming up as a guest. And she said,
Ah,
one thing that she hopes, and it is mentoring with hope for
mhm,
this next generation, is this um, emotional maturity and interaction and the maturity that will come with it because
mhm.
now you're actually socializing with people in real life, not
Yeah,
just like
virtual. Mhm.
virtual and then all the fake stuff that might come with it because there's a whole other business around how you might be using yourself as an influencer on other social platforms, I'll just say that, and
Mhm.
how real that is not. And so I think,
I love it.
how do you like bring realness into, although, yeah,
Authenticity,
authenticity?
transparency, vulnerability.
Exactly.
Yes, all those things. Just keeping it real, baby. That's what I
Yeah,
like to
just
say.
keeping it real and kicking it real, like
Mhm.
with people. But now it's kind of a thing, which is
It
wild.
is. It is. You've made me think of something, again, back to this 3.5-year-old granddaughter, because she's become a bit of an orbit for me. Um,
Oh,
so she, looks she goes through all 3-year-olds go through that why stage, and it doesn't matter how creative your answers are or goofy or inadequate your answers are, they're gonna keep asking why, right? So, we did lunch together, and she was gonna go have library time and then go down for a nap with Gigi, and so, she says, "Pops, you go to work?" And I said, "Mhm."
oh,
And she said, "Why?" Marisa, that question stopped me right there in
oh,
my
okay,
tracks. I'm like, I mean, just think about that. Why
yeah,
do you go to work? And here's this impressionable 3-year-old. What you're about to say is really important, and all these
right,
answers run through your head. Well, so Gigi can buy you anything you want, honey. That's what
yeah, right,
right. But no, because I'm realizing I'm forming for her just as my grandfather did for me. I'm forming for her understanding of work. And so we don't want negative connotation around work. We want hope, to Vivian's point,
yes,
right? And we want to build that emotional maturity
that's
even as
right,
young as a 3-year-old. So I said, work is fun and I like to have
oh,
fun. And she says, I like fun. I said, yes, you do. And I work. I said, yes, you do. And you know what your work is? Your work is play.
oh,
And she says, and then we start talking about all the things that she enjoys doing. She showed me a piece of artwork she and Gigi did that morning. She starts talking about
amazing,
her blocks and things like that. So I'm thinking, that's, and of course, I've studied Jean Piaget. We can talk about the developmental task she was going through there, right?
wow,
And
yeah,
but I mean, how can we capture that joy de vivre from her, right? In
yeah,
which our work becomes play, becomes fun, as opposed to I owe, so off to work I go. I refer to it as the working dead.
oh,
That
yeah,
that's the crowd that needs help, right? And it's just like, oh, Joe, that's too big a mountain to climb. You can't make a difference in that. Yeah, from me to we, right? How you going to do that? One person at a time.
that's right. And it starts with the work. I mean, you've talked about this already. Like, it starts with your work, right? Like getting
Totally.
your mindset right, working on
Mhm,
yourself. It starts with
mhm,
that, you
mhm.
know.
Yeah.
I totally hear you on that. And
Mhm.
it's not up to anybody else but to you. It starts with you.
At the end of the
Yeah.
day, yeah. And you said something earlier, uh, about response. Choosing a response as opposed to reacting and returning what you received
Yes.
is pivotal. You have the opportunity to choose a response,
That's right.
and you can take your time choosing it. One of the best days of my life, Marisa, I mentioned I've almost been married 41 years, right? One of the best days of my life was when I discovered I didn't have to say everything I was thinking.
Yeah.
It
Right.
really worked out better for me. There were a
Actually,
lot less
right.
apologies.
Yeah, I learned that very early on, but in a negative way. I've written about this story and I've shared it with some folks on who are listening right now. And I
Uh-huh.
think about this. efficacy for minority professionals class that I took
Uh-huh.
because I was being invested in as a high potential minority. I'll just say that. And I'm like, all right. So,
Okay.
one of the things that they taught us in this class that
Uh-huh.
actually still is with me, but in a positive way,
Cool.
was it's not the stimulus, it's the response. Like, here's like the zone of
Sure.
performance, blah, blah, to be
Yep.
a high
Yep.
performer. But it was more about if people come at you, stand down. No, I think about exactly what you said. It's more about it doesn't matter how people might be presenting themselves to you.
Mm-mm.
They might be
Mm-mm.
having a bad day, whatever. It could be
Sure.
a horrible experience, but at the end of the day, your experience is how you choose to respond to it, right?
100%.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I think that is a lot about culture. I mean, you've already said this too. It's just like how we show up really
Mm-hmm.
impacts the vibe that's happening. And
Oh,
so,
absolutely. It determines how we roll. My
totally.
friend Gary Ridge, who was CEO of WD-40 until his retirement within the last year, um, he loves to tell a story of being in a meeting. And if you want to hear him tell a story, because he tells it with an Australian accent, and
Oh,
it's much more effective. You can go to workpositive.today and just go to our podcast page, and you'll find Gary right there. But he tells this story about being in a meeting, and this one particular fellow is just not himself that day. Let's just say that.
sure.
And his behavior, he's acting out and what have you, and everybody's kind of looking at each other, like what's up with him? So after the meeting, Gary invites him for a cup of coffee. So I'm sure it was where you used to work, and so they're headed they're headed out into the parking lot, and Gary Gary comes over to his car and he looks down under his car, the back. He looks under the hood. He opens the trunk lid and looks in the trunk, and the guy says, "Gary, what the hell are you doing?" And Gary looks at him and says, "I'm looking for you, because
Oh,
the guy that was in that meeting, that's not the you I know and love."
oh, ouch.
That amazing? But
Yeah,
how different is that? And then they had a meaningful conversation over a cup of coffee about what had been going on in the guy's life and why it was a bad day. The fellow went back and apologized to his workmates and said, "I'm not at my best. Here's what's going on," which again was authentic and transparent and vulnerable,
yeah,
which of course released those into the air of that team. And it was refreshing, right? But instead of Gary going to the guy and saying, "Dude, you were horrible in there. Don't ever do that
yeah,
again." Rah, rah, rah. You
yep,
see the freedom that comes from the human dynamic
that's
in
right.
that environment. That's a response as opposed to a reaction.
That's right. It's a response, and it's also about um, keeping it real, right? I mean, you already said
Keeping
this,
it
like,
real.
how do you
Right.
keep it real? And it's like, I've been looking, where were you in that meeting? And the fact that he was able to give him feedback with empathy,
Mm,
right? Like, here's how I experienced you. I use that a lot
100%.
where they're like, or here's how others have experienced you. And people won't deny it. And they're like, well, I didn't realize that's what they experience. Like, your intent may have
Sometimes
been
there's a
different
blind
from
spot,
your
right?
impact,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
I love that story with the
But I
CEO of
love you
WD-40.
enough, Marisa, and I tell people this all the time, be my friend.
Yeah,
Come to me and tell me,
that's right.
"Joey, your fly is open," or or something,
Right.
just be my friend and tell me, because I do get I do allow myself to get trapped into situations. I do paint myself in a corner, to use a
Yeah,
common metaphor, and I just need somebody to reach in there and acknowledge, "Hey, I see your discomfort. What can I do to help?" I love you
that's
enough
right.
to acknowledge that to you.
And
It's
that's
respect plus empathy equals that
I
transformation,
love it.
right?
No, I think it's that theme all the way throughout.
Mm,
I know we only have a few minutes left. I want to
okay,
get some high level themes with your upcoming book.
okay.
What should everyone get excited about in your new 100-page book?
Yeah, exactly. I think it comes in around 98, so
Okay.
I'm pretty darn close to 100 there. The title is Small Hinges Swing Big Doors. It releases September 19. It's a series. I'm convinced, because I learned it when we were renovating the horse barn here. I thought, with these amazing, big, huge doors into these stalls, I got to have amazing, big, huge hinges. And so I went to the hardware store and I said, "Okay, dude, here's what I need. I'm sure I'm going to need a huge hinge." He said, Not really. I've got this really strong hinge here. And he showed it to me, and I looked at it. And I was underwhelmed by the hinge, and I
Mm-hmm.
said, "No, this is not going to work. I told you how much that door weighs and what have you." He said, "Yeah, but you told me the opening and how much it weighs." And he just looked at me and he said, "Dr. Joey, small hinges swing big doors."
Oh my goodness.
And at that point, I that just stuck with me. And so again, we need BHAGers in the world, but for the rest of us, we can do one thing today to create a positive work culture right where we are. And that's the genesis of this book. What's a small hinge that I can do today
I
that's
love
going to
it.
swing big doors? So I take the 5 core practices in there, and each core practice has a set of small hinges. It's short, easy things to read. You can read a little bit each day and just go do that one thing that day. It also introduces you to the Small Hinges Swing Big Doors course, which also launches September
Okay.
19th. And I've got guys like Dr. Bob Johansson that I mentioned earlier, Joe Sacchetti, who was an Army Ranger. I mean, how many Army Rangers do you know who would write a book called Guts, Smarts, and Love? I don't
Wow.
know too many Army Rangers who talk about love. Mitchell Levy,
Yeah.
Credibility Nation, is in the house. And so we talk about lots of great stuff with him. David Friedman, Culture by Design,
Yes.
also a culture architect.
Yes.
He's got a module in there. And then my good friend Jim Palmer, we talk about that final core practice, the ethical one, and it's serve first. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's 44 videos, I think there is in that course.
Amazing.
You get a copy of 3 of Bob's books, and then the rest of us contribute a book. So you get a box of books from us. It's an amazing course because I'm convinced in order to achieve our goals that you and I have talked about today, it takes each of us doing one thing
Yeah.
today to create that positive work culture. So small hinges swing big doors. Look for it on Amazon on September 19, and then look for it on our website September 19 at workpositive.today.
I love that you're sharing all the information where people can find you. And I do love this thing with you, the dot, doing one thing.
Yeah.
I think what's been consistent throughout our conversation was empathy plus respect equals transformation. And if you were to just do one thing or encourage people who have been in on this conversation today to do one thing to get to that framework, what would it be?
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. Their one thing I would, if I had to pick from the 5 core practices, the perceive, conceive, believe, achieve, and receive, it all starts and stops in your head.
Hmm.
Just become aware of the negative inputs that you're exposing yourself to in the mornings, the negative inputs of people around you. Just choose one positive thought each day to focus yourself on and just live into and out of that day, work out of it, and watch the world begin to change around you. It's going to transform. Now, again, I understand it's a huge mountain. It's Kilimanjaro, it's Everest, all combined into
Yeah,
one, right? It's a moonshot. I get that. However, you can one thing at a time. You can do one thing at a time
that's right.
today. There's lots of resources out there for you. I know you're working on a book. I've got the Small Hinges book coming out. There's a Work Positive Team Edition book. I've got a free course at workpositive.today called Something to Talk About that helps you transform your conversations. There's just a ton of stuff out there that you can do. Just do one thing today to
That's
create a
right.
positive work culture.
I love it. And it's really choose one positive thought and live into it and work into it.
It
What
starts stops in your
sage
head.
advice to get started? We are at the top of the hour, and I know that people have already reached out to you and vice versa. Can people also link up with you on LinkedIn? That
Absolutely.
good?
We're there, right?
Right on.
And by the way, I got to give a plug for you. You're on the Work Positive podcast, and I think I looked it up, and it's in 2 weeks,
Oh,
maybe
okay,
3 weeks.
great.
Yeah, your episode comes out, the Marisa Andrada
I love
episode
it.
of the Work Positive podcast. So I'm
More
excited. There's
goodness.
and
Yes.
as you
I'm
people already know, and you love Marisa, there's a ton of great content there. So be sure to check it out wherever fine podcasts are heard.
Oh my goodness, you are still living into that radio voice, which I love. And I am speaking of love, I have mad love for you, Dr.
Oh, as I
Joey.
do for you, sweetheart. Yes.
Many,
Thank you.
many thanks for spending this time. It has been an hour of joy for me. I
Mm,
know for
me too.
everybody else, and like empathy and respect and transformation and action just being
Yeah.
here with you. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I'm better for
And
this conversation. Thank you so much. I
yeah,
appreciate you.
I appreciate you. And to everybody, I appreciate all of you as well. I've got some crazy travel coming up in the next couple of weeks. So the next actual CultureCast will be live from Nashville with
Woo!
Cassidy Pope on September 14th at 11 a.m. Pacific. So hopefully we'll see y'all then.
I
And
like the way you
until
said
then,
y'all,
everybody,
'cause if you're gonna be
right?
in
I'm
Nashville, you
living
gotta
into
say
that
y'all.
Nashville,
Yeah,
Southern living. So,
that's right. The plural of
hope,
y'all is
yeah,
all y'all, by the way, just in
that's
case you were
all
wondering.
y'all,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So, thank you so much, Dr. Joey, and thank you everybody for your time. We'll see y'all later. Take care. Bye.
Love you.
Love you.